Thank you very much for allowing me to speak about how cities can act as global change makers. I think the first question is, why cities? Why should we concentrate our efforts of sustainability in the urban areas? I think firstly, it's about numerics. 54% of the world's population live in cities. Every week, 1.4 million people move from the rural areas to the urban areas. And as Jesper said earlier, this means that by 2050, two-thirds of the world's population will be in cities. But cities are also great concentrations of wealth, with 85% of global GDP located in cities. And interestingly, if you take just the 86 cities in the C40 network, just those 86, they account for a quarter of global wealth. And as a consequence of lots of people, lots of wealth, they emit carbon dioxide. And 70% of global CO2 emissions are emitted by cities. But cities don't just affect climate change, they're also affected by climate change. Our studies have shown that 70% of cities report they're already experiencing the effects of climate change. And it's getting worse year by year. And of course, cities are also the focus for a whole range of other impacts. Worsening air pollution, poor water quality, increasing inequality, leading to health impacts, crime, and other social effects. But cities are also the solution to problems. Quite often, nation-states, they're too fixated by rivalry and mutual exclusion to be able to cooperate effectively, to be able to develop common goals for the common good. Cities, on the other hand, are really linked into an intricate international web of commerce, of communication, of culture. They have to cooperate to survive. That doesn't mean they don't compete. Of course cities compete with one another. London competes with Paris, Sydney competes with Melbourne. But they do so on the basis of being better, improving the quality of life for their citizens, attracting inward investment, attracting the best talent. It's very much a race to the top. Cities are also remarkably similar to one another, more so than we think, despite differences in culture, differences in geographical location or wealth. They're dense contributions and concentrations of people who are living, who are working and playing together, trying to make a better life for themselves and their families. And as Mayor Hidalgo says, as mayors, we all face the same challenges, and consequently, we also face the same solutions. And city mayors also look to other cities for ideas. In some cases, shamelessly steal their ideas and make it as their own. That's no reflection of the picture above me, I should point out. But they also share their ideas with one another. They share their successes, and usually in private, they share their failures as well. And it's not just the ideas from the global north that share to the global south. It's increasingly becoming the other way around. I'll give an example. Portland in the US, one of the most advanced cities in the world. They got their idea for green bonds from Johannesburg through the C40 finance network. They flew some people from Johannesburg across to teach them how to do it, and now they have a green bond system. So every city is a leader in something. So what do our cities need to do to be sustainable, to continue to deliver sustainable cities and a sustainable future for the world? I think the best place to start is probably the Paris Agreement. This came into force, I think, about 2 weeks ago, so very recent. 191 countries around the world set this binding agreement to limit temperature rise to 2 degrees C, with an aspiration of 1.5 degrees. This is a truly groundbreaking moment for international diplomacy, absolutely fantastic. Then we had the US election. So what the impacts of that will be, really don't know. But it's probably not going to be positive. If we look at the US, 31 of the 35 biggest cities in the US voted for Clinton. They voted to continue the policies of the Obama administration. So we need to help these cities. We need to support them to continue their quest to be sustainable, to be low carbon, if others aren't going to do that. And the international community is absolutely vital here. They need to redouble their efforts to work together to make a difference. They need to put their foot firmly on the accelerator if others are going to put their feet on the brake. But let's remain positive, if we can. So, in order to meet the target of 1.5 degrees, what does that mean for our cities? It fundamentally means that every single city has got to be carbon neutral by 2050. Some of our cities are already well away along the path: Oslo, Copenhagen, Stockholm. But many others have got a long way to go, particularly in the US and in Australia. And of course, cities in the developing world are just starting on their path to carbon neutrality, and their emissions are just continuing to rise. But we're not starting from first principles. Since COP15 in Copenhagen in 2009, C40 cities have already delivered 10,000 actions against climate change. Granted, some of these may have been small actions where you don't have to expend too much political capital, but we have started it. Over the next 5 years, we need to significantly increase the speed of action to deliver climate actions. And these need to be significant actions. It's going to fundamentally change the way we live and the way our cities operate. We also must remember that the decisions we make today will affect the future generations. If we continue to allow urban sprawl, or we accept new infrastructure that accepts car-based economies, it will make it virtually impossible for us to meet the targets without prohibitive costs. And the work that we've done to identify how we become carbon neutral has identified 4 main areas. I talked about urban planning. We need to lock into a low-carbon economy. Our plans need to ensure sustainability. The building sector accounts for about 60% of emissions. And we need to significantly tighten up the energy performance regulations as part of new building codes. And those codes need to be significantly enforced. We need to ramp up on the retrofitting of existing buildings, municipal, residential, commercial. And we need to intensify innovation. In transport, that accounts for about 30% of cities' emissions. We need to change the way we do demand management on a global level. We need to reduce travel. For those that are using motorised modes, particularly cars, need to switch to walking and cycling. Again, this is typical sort of being done in Denmark, but it's not being done across the world. And for those modes that are motorised, they need to switch to clean sources of power. And finally, waste. That accounts for about 10% of emissions. Now, sure, we need to reduce waste, we need to recycle more, but we also need to fundamentally change the way we think about products. We need to move to a circular economy. We need to have products that actually last, and when they reach the end of their useful life, they can be properly repurposed. But cities can't do this on their own. They have to work with others. They have to work with national governments, with regional governments. They have to engage their citizens, and they have to work with business. And the private sector is vitally important here in terms of our transition to a low-carbon economy. And cities do need to help the private sector. They need to incentivise the uptake of clean energy, and they need to help them transition from ideas and innovations to actually make them large scale. And I'll talk about some of these ideas of how cities and business are working together to make a difference. So one of the first things is about raising private sector ambition. We need to really push good practice, and we need to put on a pedestal those companies that are making a difference. And this is what the London Business Energy Challenge does. Companies that have implemented projects within the City of London are put forward for an award, and they are feted amongst the community in London. In 2015, 100 companies put in submissions, and that would save 200,000 tonnes of CO2, a significant amount. But we also need to work with our biggest companies. In the US, for example, if you take the Fortune 500 companies, they employ 17% of the US workforce. Scale this up around the world, and you've got a very small number of companies that can have a very significant effect on sustainability and low-carbon solutions. We also, as cities, need to use procurement to make a difference. Cities have vast amounts of resources. They buy a lot of goods and services. I think in London it's about $7 or $8 billion a year. In Copenhagen, I think probably $1 billion to $1.5 billion. And they have the opportunity to make these choices, make green choices when they procure. And cities can also help catalyse the market. New technologies that are coming onto the market that are perhaps high cost at the moment, cities can help encourage demand to reduce the cost and make them affordable and roll them out at a large scale. And this is what the C40 Clean Bus Declaration does. 26 of our cities have committed to purchasing 50,000 clean buses between now and 2020, saving around 1 million tonnes of CO2. This declaration is a sign to the bus manufacturers to say, we'll provide the demand, you have got to be cost competitive. And it's working. So in London, the cost of electric bus is broadly similar to a hybrid bus over the life cycle, which means recently London increased their purchases of electric buses 5-fold. And of course, cities need to support innovation. They need to try lots of new ideas, and if the ideas work, they need to scale them up very quickly to citywide level, and then they need to be replicated across the globe. And this is a great thing about the New York City's Danish Clean Tech Hub. I know there's a picture of the wall there, but don't worry about it. What that does is get Danish technology, Danish ideas and Danish skills into New York to help solve the problems relating to climate. This will allow them to scale up green business and green jobs in both cities. But we really need to do a lot more. We need to have an intricate international web of clean tech businesses, far more than we've got now, and cities need to be at the centre of it. And then we need to help develop the projects. Cities develop many, many projects. And quite often, the private sector doesn't get involved until right at the end, when they're bidding for services and procuring services. And I've known from experience many times the project is underway, it's running, and you realise you've misscoped it. You have to stop the project, redo it again, wasting time, wasting money, because the private sector hasn't been involved at an early stage. So what the City Solutions Platform does, which is a coalition between C40 and Clean in Denmark, funded by Real Dania, brings the private and public sector together right at the beginning to co-create the project, to work together to define the problems and the solutions, and take that forward to specifications at procurement stage, meaning that the projects delivered are the right projects. They save time, they save money, and they deliver effectively for the citizens. And then finally, we have finance. This is probably one of the biggest barriers to delivering green solutions across all our cities in C40. Cities have great projects, they're technically adept, but they lack the financial skills to turn these projects into investment proposals. The financial community, on the other hand, has a lot of technical expertise on financing and access to a lot of money, but is nervous about working with city governments in many cases because they don't understand the projects. The C40 Climate Finance Facility brings the two together. It provides technical assistance to take technically good projects through to develop an investment proposal and then promotes it to the market. It also develops investment pipelines of all the projects that our 86 cities are doing So the financial community can see all the things that are coming up, and they can then start building a pipeline. So many of the things that I've mentioned now, cities are starting to take forward. It's demonstrating that cities are the leading player in delivering sustainable and a low-carbon world. And after the US elections, I started to think, what would happen? Maybe, if just maybe, mayors ruled the world. Thank you.